You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, but this is Patti Vasquez sitting in for him today. And on the phone with me is Professor Henry Kamerling, Seattle University, historian of prisoners, monsters, and superheroes. I love this. I'm not a zombie. I've got a healing factor, stuff like this. But by the way, Henry, it's one of the genres that I never could get into with the zombies, like the slow moving, the skin peeling, right. Like the noises. What drew you to zombies? I mean, what is it about the zombies that you love so much?
That's a hard question to answer. I think I've always been interested in very dark things and very scary things. And I'm interested, if you think about people who are in prison, or if you think about monsters and to a lesser degree superheroes, these are all ways in which we draw boundaries around who we are and who they are. They're conversations about us and them. And so criminals, monsters, zombies is a subset of monsters, all participate in that conversation. And so I'm fascinated by that topic.
Outstanding. I'll try to look at the zombie stuff from a different point of view. I do like the one with Woody Harrelson. Yes.
Yeah, Zombieland is fabulous. Yeah. I do teach a class called The History of the Undead. So, maybe you should just sign up for that. We could walk through from origins to today.
Do you do any virtual classes?
Only in the context of Seattle University. Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh, that's good to know. Good to know. Here's Brian, who has a question for you. I think it's for both of us. Oh, for you.
Okay.
Yes. Hey, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. This is a question to the professor. It's been a long time since I studied history. So you really piqued my interest when you said that there's some very contentious debates going on within the academy. And I'm very curious if you could just briefly outline what those debates or arguments or battles are about.
Yeah, sure. Well, those debates are happening at every moment in time throughout time. So, within the academy, there are always a cascading series of debates, and there's even a field of study within the academy that is just about studying those debates. It's called historiography, right? And so, which is the study of history, and what kind of debates have there been over the course of time. And so it's interesting that sometimes I don't think the public gets brought along as quickly as possible. And so a really good example of that might be, we still have this really in the public at large, this really celebratory nature of Lewis and Clark, right? The popular narrative of Lewis and Clark, which is sort of vaguely a Midwestern story. They start in St. Louis and they go out west, all the way out here to the Pacific Northwest, is that they're explorers, they're adventurers. And that's often how that story gets taught. But inside the academy, now there's a much more complicated conversation about who Lewis and Clark were. Were they agents of settler colonialism? Were Lewis and Clark agents of white supremacy for a white nation that was out to conquer the continent, as opposed to just seeing them as sort of plucky adventurers who and who had an indigenous person with them, Sacagawea? So that winds up being a wholesome story of cooperation, depending on how you're taught that story. And so in the academy now, there's a lot of debate about how we should reconfigure the narrative of Lewis and Clark, how we should present it to the public at large, how we should talk about that experience. That's just sort of one small example of that. But there are always debates inside the academy about how historians understand history, and we don't do a great job sometimes of bringing the public along as those debates unfold.
Brian, how's it sound?
Yeah. I've been totally, this is news to me, and I do read a lot. On a lighter note, I'd like to recommend a zombie novel. I think it's the best zombie novel ever written. It's Zone 1 by Colson Whitehead. Whitehead, who's a multiple Pulitzer Prize winner.
Yeah. Zone 1 is great. That's great. That's a great recommendation.
All right. I'm going to Zone 1. I'm putting it into my list right now. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Let me recommend something to Brian really quickly.
Yeah.
Brain's a zombie memoir. If he's looking for that, maybe this is just another topic. We just do zombies all day long.
I have a reading assignment. Now we'll do a zombie book club.
Yeah.
Who's the author of that?
I can't remember off the top of my head, so it escapes me. but the title, Brains, a Zombie Memoir, I'm sure you can find it. I've taught it before in the classroom, so I should know the author, but it's just slipping my mind right now.
I'm trying to find it desperately.
Thank you
so much, Brian. And to that conversation, obviously we had a big debate. It's Robin Becker, by the way. Brains, a Zombie Memoir is by Robin Becker. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it does. It's fun. It's a very fun read.
Excellent. But we've been having this debate for quite a while. And again, when we had the Christopher Columbus statues, people were protesting and demanding they come down. And I think that folks felt as though it was sort of the spontaneous eruption that all of a sudden, because we were talking about Black Lives Matter, but it was a debate and a protest that had been going on for quite a long time. And actually, when I was at U of I was part of the protests to fight against having the chief as our mascot and, putting images of the chief on boxers and on pillows and all, and for me at the University of Illinois, I remember talking to someone who was a native and said that, they had when they said that this was offensive and hurtful to them personally to use these images, he was attacked. People threw a rock through his window. And I thought all this guy said was, this hurts me. And then he was attacked. And that's when I was like, well, that has to be wrong. That's all I know is if these people are going to react violently, then there's something just completely horrible happening here. And that's just where I think I've come from. That's what informs me. And that's one of the things that we talk about on this show is if someone raises their hand and says, this isn't right, this is how this hurts me emotionally or physically, and the reaction from people to say, well, I'm not doing that, or that's too bad, that just seems to me that's conservative as far as I'm concerned. I know we're not talking necessarily politics, but just the point of view that people are coming from.
Yeah. Well, there's another excellent book, No Common Ground by Karen Cox, that talks about, monument building, Confederate monuments in throughout the American South. And it's an excellent book. I've taught it before in the classroom. And she details the origins of a lot of these monuments, the controversies over them, their long history, and up until today, sort of the effort to bring them down, the effort which has been to some degree, to some measure, successful. And so I'm on the tear it down crowd. I mean, I don't think these monuments are sacrosanct and that they can't be removed and should be removed. And not just monuments, but like buildings named after people should be renamed, or mascots that should be changed. And so, I think that as we change as a society, these things should change. And we should listen to people when they raise their hand and say these things are problematic or offensive or hurtful. And I don't know what the cost is to making those kinds of changes.
Well, it's identity. It goes to, this is something that I struggled with at the previous radio station I worked for, was that people would hear me talk about whether it was catcalling or it was about, mascots. They would call up and be angry that, here's where I'm coming from. But the person who's telling you that this is painful is asking for something, and they take it as part of, as a personal attack, as though, and I think part of it is, and when I say identity, it means that they feel threatened that their way of living or what they believed is somehow wrong. And we're not telling you it's wrong. We're just telling you we would like to move in a different direction.
Yeah.
I mean, or we're telling you it's wrong, but that's accept that and move on.
It is. So there's a powerful backlash that's taking place. It's one of the reasons why history is contentious, is that the narrative that is unfolding in the classroom is different than the one that you've been taught, that you've stitched into your identity, that you feel anxious about unstitching it, because it means you have to create a new identity.
Yes.
And you have to think about the world in a new way. And so, but that is always happening. We are always doing that. But the backlash is powerful, and history shows us that backlash is often successful in a disturbing way. Jim Crow segregation is Jim Crow segregation. The disfranchisement that came along with it, supported by a wave of extra legal violence, right, lynching and other kinds of violent action, was a reaction to the threatened political progress of Reconstruction. Right, racial inclusion and biracial political coalitions, and that backlash was successful, and it lasted for decades. We are in a liminal time period right now where there's a threatened racial reconfiguration. Black Lives Matter is one example of that, but gay rights is another example of that. There's new liberation movements going on right now. Groups of people are pushing for a different reconfiguration of society, and there's a powerful backlash against that. It remains to be seen, from my perspective, in terms of who's going to win that battle.
Well, we've talked all week about how important some of these races around the country have been. Seeing Sarah Palin lose in Alaska was it felt good.
Yeah.
Kansas was encouraging
to an indigenous woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all good stuff. Roosevelt has been on hold for a bit. Let's put Roosevelt on. Has a question. Hey, Roosevelt. Thank you so much for calling. Meet my friend, Professor Henry Kamerling.
Hi, Roosevelt.
Professor Henry, how you doing? Patty, thank you for taking my call. Okay, the subject is reparations, and I'm going to give you as recent as an example yesterday where Poland is asking $1.3 trillion in reparations from Germany for how much they were decimated, not only in lives but in money. And then I'm going to give you other examples, such as the president of Mexico 2 or 3 years ago asked for Spain for an apology for the genocide that they caused in Mexico. And I'm going to also say, as far as African Americans, 40 acres and a mule. As far as Native Americans, I believe in 2020, the Supreme Court, as reported by Reuters and The Guardian, that Oklahoma was almost half, or is half. They ruled that it's half Native American land. So my question is, where do you stand, and how do you feel about reparations for African Americans, Native Americans, and the examples I gave you as far as Poland, Mexico, you name it? In other words, they want to hold people responsible from these countries and these treaties that were broken, and basically the United States went back on their word when it came down 40 acres and a mule, in my opinion, and when it came down to the Native Americans, because they broke almost every treaty that they did with the Native Americans. That's it. That's my question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Roosevelt. I'm a fan of opening up the conversation about reparations. I think it's an important conversation. I think that you've listed some examples. There are others. Japanese Americans in the 1980s got reparations for internment in the United States. I would argue, and the Japanese American community might argue that the reparations weren't large enough. But yeah, I think that 40 acres and a mule was argument put forward in the context of Reconstruction, but never enacted. Yeah, there were never any reparations, not just for slavery, but also for Jim Crow segregation and disfranchisement. I think that it's an important conversation to have, and we can find lots of examples. You could layer into that the way in which Germany, you mentioned Poland, but Germany has paid reparations in one context or another to Jews, both German Jews and sort of the Jewish diaspora. And so, yeah, there are lots of examples, successful examples and important examples. There are some examples of reparations that haven't maybe gone far enough. But yes, I think it's an important conversation to have and something to seriously consider in our politics.
Thank you so much, Roosevelt. I appreciate that. How's that sound?
Patty?
Yes.
Patty, may I say something else? I don't know if I'm still on.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I had another follow-up question, very briefly, and that is, what is your opinion, either one of you or both of you, what is your opinion about our fellow Americans that say, well, I don't think African Americans should get anything because when my ancestors came, we didn't have nothing to do with slavery, but I believe that they benefited first by the fact that they were brought over here to do work, but this country already had people, but they never gave them the jobs, such as African Americans or Native Americans. So when, quote, white Americans that came from Europe they say, well, we didn't have nothing to, our ancestors didn't have anything to do with slavery, so why should we pay? That's my follow-up question. Thank you, and I'm sorry that I made it too long.
You're fine, Roosevelt. Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and it's one that is sort of difficult to unpack. I don't think that anyone wins by having sort of an Olympics of suffering, like who suffered the most, right? There's clearly a lot in our history that we all today in the United States, every one of us, every last member of our citizens in the United States today has to answer for and make amends for. and so that's an important conversation to have, and we can find successful examples of reparations both in the context of our own history and in world history, and as a way of moving forward. Clearly, there are wrongs that need to be addressed, and the harms of those wrongs, whether we're talking about indigenous communities in the United States or whether we're talking specifically about hereditary racial slavery in the United States, and the legacy after that in the context of Jim Crow segregation and disfranchisement, there are wrongs that have existed in our past that have yet to be fully addressed, and it's why those topics are still so contentious today.
Absolutely. You're right. There is so much to unpack. We have got Ron from Michigan. Hey, Ron, you wanted to ask again about Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, Patty, thank you for taking my call again. But, my take on that thing was, it has to be a white supremacist cover-up because of the fact that we would never have gotten that land if it wasn't for black liberation of Haiti, who defeated Napoleon in Dominican, and the first, free slave revolt, because Napoleon could no longer field an army because they were decimated in the fight against Haiti, and he was bankrupt, so he had to sell the Louisiana Purchase at a bankruptcy sale, and not only that, there was like 115 veterans from the Haitian Revolution who fought with the American Revolution at Yorktown, and three of those people later became presidents of Haiti. And it's part of the whole thing that Haiti's never stopped being punished for defeating Napoleon in France by the white supremacist world. In my opinion, it's just on and on it goes. But that's my take on the reason we got the Louisiana Purchase in the first place.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I like the counterfactual game. So one of the questions is that at some point an event becomes inevitable, right? At some point the United States conquest, and the conquest is an important word there. The United States conquest of the North American continent becomes inevitable, right? But at what point does it become inevitable? At what point is it bound to happen? Probably not in 1803 when the Louisiana Purchase is made, but and the relationship with the history of Haiti there, the intertwined relationship with the United States and Haiti is an interesting and important observation there. And so at some point, the United States is bound to acquire the continent. Lewis and Clark are from my perspective, agents of American imperialism is one way to think about how we understand the story of Lewis and Clark.
I love that. I think that I love the idea of the inevitability of moments in history and the conversation that we're having. I know that we've taken up so much of your time, so thank you so much for calling, Ron, and asking that question. I've got one more caller, Henry. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. So it's Steve from the Gold Coast. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so to make a couple of points, and I think, when you talk about things like taking down monuments that depict Christopher Columbus, I mean, the irony there for people who don't understand it is that if you ask someone like an elementary or high school student in the late 19th century who Christopher Columbus was in America, they would never clue. It was the desire on the part of the Italian-American community to be folded into the narrative that is American history that creates Christopher Columbus as an important figure in American history. So people who were not considered white, and for those who don't know it, Southern and Eastern European, Slavs and so forth, Greeks, Italian, were not considered white people until very recently. There's all sorts of books that have been written about how the Irish became white, how Italians, how the Jews became white. All of these people. I come from the Balkans. My parents, I'm the first generation Eastern European in terms of my ancestry. And now that leads me to my second point, and that is that as much as I would love to have been included in the narrative that is early American history, the Enlightenment was not a function of Southern European culture or of Eastern European culture. It was thoroughly Northwest European. And as much as I would love to take credit for people like Hobbes or Locke or any number of other great thinkers and authors, I just can't interject my ancestry into something where it doesn't exist. So how do we balance the two? Because at some point we talk about those important ideas that were the basis for the founding of this country and the Constitution and so forth. You are forced to conclude that some groups from certain regions had far more of a contribution than others. And so then do we then look for other things so that we can then fold people in so that we can be more inclusive? Or do we look at simply history objectively and say, well, these are the people who did what they did. There may be all sorts of injustice, including slavery and imperialism, that underpin that. But nonetheless, they are the people who came up with these ideas and these concepts.
Excellent. What do you think, Henry?
Well, there's lots to unpack there. And I would say about Christopher Columbus, there's some really interesting observations there. And it is true that many of the immigrant groups in the United States, the Irish in the 1840s and 50s weren't considered white. And white is a slippery concept. People, as you mentioned, ethnic groups become white over time. Whiteness enfolds certain groups into it. And in the context of Christopher Columbus, if there are other Italians to choose from, you could have a Joe DiMaggio statue, right? There's a lot of other Italian Americans. You could be like, what about a statue to that guy? And maybe a lot of people could get behind, as opposed to, say, Christopher Columbus, who, the nice way of saying it, has a problematic story, right? There are a lot more salty ways to express, a particular perspective on Christopher Columbus, sort of a murderous, genocidal maniac, perhaps, might be another way to think about him. So we're always reconfiguring our history. We're always drawing circles around who we are and who they are, and how does the great we form, right? The e pluribus unum, one from many. And I'm a fan of drawing that circle in my scholarship and in the classroom in the broadest and most inclusive ways, so that everybody's story gets filtered into the American experience and everybody has a purchase on that. And we're a better nation when we draw the biggest circle we can.
Outstanding. I think it's a great way to end our conversation, because we need to keep having these conversations with everyone. And I would love to invite you back, Professor Henry Kamerling, because I kind of want to ask you, we've run out of time, I want to ask you about this idea of being woke, that we're just woke and all of a sudden we're trying to change history when really we're trying to tell more of it. And it's not a retelling. I mean, it is, but there's so much more there. Where can folks find you and find out about your work, the book that you've written, and follow you on Twitter?
Oh, geez. Well, you mentioned my book, Plenty, so thank you for that. I don't know. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Henry Kamerling, HCAM1 is my Twitter handle, and I tweet a lot, I guess.
Yes,
I don't know.
You tweet, and you tweet very well. Yeah. And the book, by the way, was Brains, a Zombie Memoir that Henry also recommended. Maybe we'll make that our book club. It was lovely to talk to you today, Henry. Thank you so much. My best to Kathy and the family, the kids, Maeve and Dash. By the way, how's the first few weeks of school going for Maeve?
It's going great, and she took your advice about not sticking with the class. She already dropped her first class, which I thought was excellent advice.
Oh my! I hope that's okay. Part. Okay.
No, it was. I think that's a good call. I think I appreciated that. That was great.
Yeah, there's no martyrdom in your freshman year. Yeah, If it doesn't feel right, if it feels off, tell your kids it's okay to add or drop. Just know those deadlines, because I missed mine for Econ 101.
Yes, just don't forget to do it and accidentally take the class the whole semester, and that could be a problem.
That's also a problem. Henry, have a great...
Make sure you file the paperwork. Yeah.
Yes, definitely file the paperwork. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks. This was fun.